All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Arthur, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Ben?
Good.
Yeah, so
Uh,
today I was thinking we'd chat a little bit and talk about our travels within the U.S. What would you say are some of the highlights of your travels around the U.S.? Any particular trips that come to mind?
well, I've been to a good number of cities in the U.S., and the trips that seem to really stick in my mind are the ones that I took in a car cross country. I've taken several cross country trips. And as you know, this country is humongous, right? To drive from the West Coast, where I'm from, California, to the East Coast, all the way to the coast, literally to the coast, like Florida or whatever. It is a week drive, and it's what is it, three? So maybe 5 or 6 thousand kilometers. That's that's a continent, yes. And so I really enjoyed those trips, and I've done it a few times. So I've seen how the country changes slowly. In an airplane, you don't really see it slowly change, right? It's like coming up from a subway. You're here, you're there, and that's it. You don't see all the stuff in between. But to see all the stuff in between is fascinating, and I loved my road trips cross country. What about for you?
Well, I could see how that would be a great highlight of the trip itself, just seeing the significant changes. I've generally not been on big cross-country trips where you have gone through many states, uh,
Hmm.
but I have gone on longer trips, where we drive from where we are all the way up through upstate New York and into Canada. So
Uh,
those are like, 12-hour trips. Sometimes you do an overnight in between. But
mhm.
yeah, no, I've also had some long trips as well as short trips, and there's a lot of benefits to going on longer trips, like you said, seeing the various changes along the way.
Yes. It can be very tiring, and if you're going with a friend or a few friends, just be prepared that you will get into a fight. And like you may not speak to each other after the trip. You'll end up after some time it'll be fine, but yes, it could be stressful like that. But no, all in all, it's good. And you
Do
met
you know the saying, or the saying, or it's maybe kind of a mantra, I don't know, that people say that a good test of a friendship is to go on a long trip
Oh
and
yes,
and a
yes,
long drive, and if you're
yes,
still able to talk to each other after a few hours,
yeah.
then it's a good test for that. That's a good point that you brought up. Anyway, yeah. So, any specific trips that you can remember that really stick out?
Well, you mentioned upstate New York, so let's talk about upstate New York because in the fall, I think upstate New York is absolutely stunning. I love Rhinebeck, Poughkeepsie, that area there, Hudson River Valley. It is just breathtakingly beautiful, hauntingly beautiful. I mean, just the stuff of dreams.
Yeah, well, a lot of people will take even, excuse me, across the Northeast. They'll go on trips up to the Northeast just to see what they call the fall colors, right?
Yeah,
Whether
yes.
it's in upstate New York or in parts of New England, those would be the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine.
Hmm.
But yeah, upstate New York, I think one of those things that is often forgotten about New York is how big a state it is. It's not just New York City. If you drive an hour or two outside of the city, you're in the countryside, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is. The Vanderbilts had a house up the Hudson River Valley. Um, and that whole area really, it's just incredible. And so different from New York City.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Uh, so, did you do a lot of hiking there? What did you do when you were up there? Were you hiking? Were you just kind of enjoying the colors during the fall season, checking out a few lakes? What?
Yeah, exactly that. Outdoor activities, slow rural drives. Gosh, I'd like to be like that guy fishing because it seems so peaceful. But I'm not like I don't go fishing, but it would really complete the picture, right? Because it's so
Yeah.
relaxing, it's super relaxing.
Well, I think maybe you hit on one of the main attractions there because, when you're leaving a very large urban area of New York City, for example, or Boston, and you really want to literally get out of town and just have a little bit of a respite from the hustle and bustle of a, whatever work you're doing, the stress that is encompassed in living an urban modern life,
Yeah.
that it's good to be able to get out, relatively on a convenient, trip, on maybe just what we would call a day trip.
Yeah.
You go in the morning, you get away from the city, and you're there, within a couple of few hours, and then you hang out for a while, and then you just come back, and it gives you that sense of relaxation, even if you don't go on many, many different activities.
Yeah, that's so true because it, at least for me, it's very restorative to see a swath of green, or in the case of New England in the fall. Actually, no, no, New York is not New England; it's the Mid-Atlantic. But let north, upstate New York in the fall, to see just the colors and the trees and all that nature. Yeah, it's very restorative. It's rejuvenating. You feel recharged. And I like it very much, especially coming from Southern California, where we don't have uh, fall foliage every year. I'm not every the whole year rather. It's the same color, And so for me, it's a real treat. And I actually had one time thought, I would love to live in the East Coast. And my friends would joke, "Yeah, sure, until it's winter, then you'll be hightailing it back to California."
Yeah, well, there are these things called, what do they call them? What's the bird? They call them
Oh,
what?
snowbirds.
Snowbirds. Yeah, they'll
Yeah.
say, oh, there's these people who will live in the northern part of the United States for several months, and if they can afford it, or maybe if they're retired, they go back and forth between there and Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so that way they get sort of the best of both worlds in terms of avoiding the harsh winter. Uh,
Yeah.
I'll say though that the winters lately haven't been that harsh, and so maybe the advantage of that has been less and less. But yeah, I think the idea of being able to experience actual change of seasons is
Yeah.
the thing.
I the one thing I really love about that corner of the country, the northeastern corner of the country, is that, I mean, yes, there's fall foliage in other parts of the world as well, and maybe just as beautiful, but there's something about the landscape dotted with, bales of hay and also these barns. I love seeing like the fall foliage, rolling hills or whatever, and these red barns that are so American. It's so iconic. And I had this thing where I would take pictures of barns, and I would collect pictures of barns that I took. That was my thing, when I was regularly visiting New England in the fall.
Yeah, like you said, it's a very iconic uh, scene to be able to see a farm, maybe the red barn, the typical red barn, and it's sort of maybe slightly being um, worn out,
Mm-hmm.
so that you see that age that it
Mm-hmm.
has gone through, the
Yeah.
aging process of this being going through time, and I don't know, there's something very, yeah, it just resonates very strongly. And for those people who are not growing up around it, you do feel like, and I've done the same thing, sometimes just seeing a bridge that was an
Oh
old
yeah.
bridge, or seeing uh, an old house that is a farmhouse. You go, wow, that's really quaint, and you want to take a picture. But yeah, I've done that as well, and that's part of the enjoyment, just seeing those different perspectives, those different, literally, those perspectives, those things you see along the drive, or especially on the smaller rural roads, going
Yeah.
off the, we use this term, going off the beaten track,
Mm-hmm.
meaning not just going on the main highways, but going off the main roads and seeing what's really back in there.
Oh yes, I love long fall drives. There are You can Google these routes as well, that are just absolutely stunning. And so, what I used to do with my friends is we'd make little videos, right? So we would do these because we're car guys, and so what we would do, we would take these cool cars and we would drive on these rural roads with the fall foliage, and we would film like the car driving over, like all the leaves, the colorful leaves on the ground, and we would do slow motion, and just the way the motion of the car would displace the leaves, all of that in slow motion is incredibly beautiful, and romantic, really. And yeah, we used to do that, and it's beautiful. Combining my two loves, fall and cars.
Yeah, and that's part of the American experience, is enjoying our really wide and very great range of geographic features on these drives. And I've had the good fortune, or sometimes the misfortune, of having to drive in all kinds of different climates, in different seasons, back and forth, especially going up and down down the East Coast towards Canada. And I really enjoyed it, and especially going off of the main road, sometimes exploring a little bit. But one of the things I'll also mention about that is that it's sometimes not just about uh, getting to our destination, but also getting away from where we were.
Hmm.
And where we live, there's also light pollution, and
Yeah.
and and so people want to be able to see stars, you know,
Yes.
and drive to certain areas where there's not as much light from the city, and so you're able to see more stars as well.
Yeah, and also, like the countryside it has a certain smell, the smell of maybe just fresh rain on the earth, and it smells differently, and the light is different. And yes, you can see the stars. It's just a whole incredible experience, and it's the reason why I've always fantasized about living in the country, is because of the New England, excuse me, the northeastern part of the country that makes me feel like this is something that would be just a dream come true, because the countryside is so beautiful. Because bear in mind, being from Southern California, when you're outside of the city, you are in the desert. You are in a very barren, dry, dead landscape, right? And I am not a big fan of brown. I like green and I like colors. And in your corner of the country, you get that. You get the green, you get the colors in autumn. And so I that's why I really love the East Coast.
We occasionally have relatives who come and visit from overseas, especially from Middle East, and or Pakistan, India. But now Pakistan and India, depending on where you live, it can be quite green. But for those people coming from the Middle East and they visit us in Virginia, they can't help but remark every time, especially if they're coming in the late spring or in the summer, it's like, oh my God, it is so green here. uh, and and it's more green than I would say even in other cities like New York City or Boston or Baltimore, because you don't have this kind of billboards everywhere, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the buildings are a little bit further apart. Certainly in Washington D.C., that's not the case, but if you go to Virginia, I mean, buildings are a little further apart, a little bit further. There's some areas where it's more urban, but there's a lot more green space.
Yeah. Yes.
Parks are quite a few. There's all over the place. You within a drive or a short drive, you can go to the Shenandoahs. So the greenery is the big thing. But yeah, that's a good point. What about in the winter? I mean, are you a skier?
No, I've snowboarded a bit, but I never really got into winter sports. Although the après ski, I definitely partake in. But no, 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 I don't ski.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, I mean, in upstate New York is actually where we had one of the Winter Olympics, right?
Mm, mm-hmm.
Lake Placid, in fact, one of the Winter Olympics was held there in upstate New York, and it's well known for its summer. I'm sorry, skiing and winter events. So there's a lot of skiing, especially in Vermont and New Hampshire as well.
Yes, Vermont is very famous for skiing, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned Lake Placid, because yeah, I've never been to Lake Placid, and The first time I heard of Lake Placid was in a movie called Lake Placid. Are you familiar with that movie? And I'm like, oh my God, what the? Because there's nothing placid about that movie. Placid meaning calm, right, and serene. But it's like a Jaws movie. It's like what was it, like a shark or something
I I
eating people?
vaguely recall it's like a horror or kind of film, right?
Yeah, like where there's some water animal, maybe it was a shark or something, eating people, and so I'm like, oh, Lake Placid, huh? Okay.
That's Hollywood. Thanks a lot, Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. And well, like how Hollywood, with Jaws and everything, but meanwhile, Martha's Vineyard is one of the most beautiful places in America. But Jaws was filmed there.
Yeah, what is it about that? I mean, we maybe this is an interesting little segue into your background as far as Hollywood and what it does to beautiful places and how it sort of popularizes certain places in the country. But yeah, I mean, we don't think of Lake Placid other than what we might come across in a movie. But there are a lot of beautiful lakes, truly, and one of them is a big tourist draw, and we spent time there, and that's Lake George. Have you ever heard of Lake George?
Might have. It sounds familiar. Where is it?
It's basically about halfway up between New York City and Canada, um,
Hmm.
and it's right off of the main highway. There's literally an exit, like you're as soon as you're off the highway, you're almost at the lake,
Hmm.
and it's a several mile long lake, but they have boat rides. They've got a lot of tourist stuff. It's a little bit of a tourist trap, actually, but we enjoyed it. Uh,
Hmm.
we enjoyed it, and the kids liked it. I don't know. It's a nice trip, and that's
Yes.
one of those things about that we use in terms of phrases, just this idea of tourist traps. And
Yeah.
I and and there are places like that also where everybody goes, right? And that's one of
Yeah.
those places. But what's your take on that? What do you tend to do in terms of you do consciously avoid places like that?
No, I don't mind visiting places that are quote tourist traps. I don't mind. I find that it's better maybe to visit maybe at the end of the season or before the season, just before the rush.
Yeah,
And it's a little more palatable. Otherwise, yeah, I don't like when things are too crazy busy. And also, the other thing is when it's really crazy busy, everybody's sort of like they're stretched to the limit. You know what I mean? And people aren't that happy. People working
yeah,
those
yeah,
resorts or whatever.
yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about, going on these longer drives to places or maybe day trips that you can sort of go generally with some ease, where we live or where I live in the Northeast, or I'm technically in what we call the Mid Atlantic here in Virginia, but it's not too far of a drive to go up to the Northeast.
Yeah.
What about other places in the U.S. that you've either traveled to, flown there, or driven there? What any other highlights on those trips?
Well, let me think. Are we staying in the northeastern corner of the country?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
I've been to New Orleans. I've also been to other parts of the West Coast, which I think are very different from your part of the West Coast, like going to Portland, Oregon.
Hmm.
Or,
Hmm.
I mean, I really enjoyed Portland, Oregon, but
Yeah.
that's a totally different West Coast kind of
Yes,
experience,
it
right?
is. I also really like Portland. The thing that struck me about Portland is how incredibly green it is and how many trees there are. And again, I love looking at the landscape that's just green and trees, right? And that's what Portland is. It's really beautiful like that. Of course, I was there. The times that I've been there, a couple times, it was in the summer. So I don't know. I guess in the winter they say it rains a lot. I've never been there for that, but Portland is wonderful, and the people are equally wonderful. They're so friendly. I mean, so friendly.
Yeah, that is true. I know that's a bit of a cliche about a lot of places we people go, but it is absolutely true. And the other thing I think that's noteworthy about Portland is that I think I'll have to check this, but it's one of the healthiest places in the world as well. like that part of the country, people are very health conscious, and not that they aren't in Southern California. I'm sure they are also, but there's something about the access to all the different outdoor activities
Yeah.
and the green space, and this idea of sort of being a little bit more earthy,
Yeah.
uh, and I don't know how to explain that term even more than just to use it in how I said it, but uh, there's a lot more sense of the environment
Mm-hmm.
and cleanliness, and so urban planning is also a big deal, like really being conscientious about how we put out or how we plan a part of a city so that it makes sense to people, uh,
Yes.
for walkable spaces, for recreation, all of that. And I think because of that, it makes it one of the, broadly speaking, healthier places to live, you know. Uh,
Yes.
so as opposed to, like Southern California, again, there's a lot of healthy people there, but you've got terrible traffic,
Mm-hmm.
and also, there's a certain kind of lifestyle which is a little bit more intense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
not unrelated to Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yes. Yes.
yeah, but
It's interesting you mentioned how health. Okay, yes, people in LA are really health conscious as well. People in Portland really health conscious, but I feel like for different reasons. In Portland, I think they're into good health on a deeper level, right?
yeah.
Whereas in LA, it's just because people want to look beautiful. That's all. That's all it is.
Yeah, I think that is a part of it. Absolutely.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, every place has its, I think, advantages and disadvantages. It- Ultimately, is in terms of, living somewhere as opposed to traveling somewhere, you have to look at how it fits within your own personality
Yeah.
and what you enjoy. But I've heard of people who hate living in that part of the country, meaning the Northwest, because
Uh,
of the rain. Because of the rain,
yeah.
and then others who are like, no way. I'm glad so many other people don't come here. But but
Mm-hmm.
but you know what? I want to segue back to you really quickly on this note. Apparently, a lot of your LA compatriots have invaded Seattle. Do you know about that? Like,
Yeah, I
right?
guess. I mean, what? So why are they choosing Seattle? I mean, it can't be for a lower cost of living because Seattle's not cheap.
Yeah. So what's about that? Like, why go from LA other than the jobs? Maybe it was all of Microsoft and Amazon and all these other big companies going there. I don't know, but it has grown immensely, and they say a lot of it were people coming from Southern California. And
Huh? I don't know.
I
I think
remember,
real estate is a
yeah,
little cheaper, that's for sure. But I mean, I don't know if it's maybe taxes, perhaps. I don't know.
yeah,
Um,
I don't. Yeah, I just remember at one point a lot of Seattleites or whatever they're called, people from Seattle were complaining how there's so many people from LA here. But maybe just people like complaining about people from LA, you know?
I think so. I
It,
think no, because I remember like even like 20 years ago, people in Portland were complaining about Californians going there and driving their real estate prices up.
yeah, yeah.
But it is true though, because I mean I had some friends, they would just buy houses in Portland just because they're like, oh, I visited and it was so cheap, so I bought a place and I'm gonna buy another place because it's so cheap. And I'm like, that's why they don't like Californians.
Well, yeah, let's not completely, you know, I was about to say divorce, but I would say let's not completely separate the idea of these sentiments from economics. I think
Yeah.
for a certain period of time, not too long ago, there were a lot of people, and this is 30, 40, more 50 years ago, many people who are from Japan buying up property on the West Coast, and everybody was saying, oh, Japanese are taking over. And
Hmm.
now, more recently, was Chinese people
Hmm.
from Chinese mainland China who were buying up properties on the West Coast and shooting prices up. And I'm sure that's still happening. But wherever the economics are sort of driving, the cost of living up, people sort of blame a general community or group, and I'm sure
Hmm.
that's only a part of the issue. But
Hmm.
these people become easy targets, whether it's people from LA buying up property, or people from another country buying up property. They say, oh, they're the ones who are ruining this place.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, but then you know what? Americans are doing the same thing. We're going to Italy,
yeah,
we're going to Spain, and we're snatching up several properties at a time because it's so much cheaper than California. So we're doing that too. Everybody's doing
yeah.
that.
Anyway,
Everybody
yeah.
seeks opportunity. Yeah.
But I digress into
Yes.
economics. Anyway, so what about other places that you've enjoyed traveling to and visiting? Anywhere else in the U.S.?
I find Wyoming to be fascinating.
Ah,
They don't call it Big Sky for no reason. It's really stunning there.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
That's a place that I personally have not visited. What's the main area? Is that Jackson Hole?
Yes, Jackson Hole, the Grand Teton, the this beautiful mountain range is so stunning. My God. Yeah. Anyway, if you like outdoor activities, there's something for you year round. And I was there in the summer because I don't ski, right? So, but yeah, summer, beautiful, beautiful. Despite being warm, you still see these snow-capped mountains because the Grand Tetons are so high up, right? So, yeah, it's really stunning, really beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. No, that I think that part of the country, especially where you have these high mountain ranges, that's along the Rockies, correct? The Rocky Mountains?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, which is they also call that the Continental Divide, if I'm not mistaken. So
Mm,
you have this big range of mountains that goes all the way from Canada down, actually all the way down into, I think it goes down in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. Does it?
hmm.
Does it?
Sounds
Uh,
about right. Yeah.
I mean, but it goes up and down, north to south, and it kind of separates the country in many ways. But it's also very stunning, as you said, from a just appearance point of view. It's just beautiful mountains,
Hmm.
big, huge mountain range. Um, and I think, what are the states that would go along that mountain range? You got Colorado,
Hmm.
Wyoming. What else? I guess Montana.
Oh yeah, Montana's nice as well. Yes,
Yeah, great, great.
for
No,
nature.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. So what that's one of those areas that I haven't spent a lot of time. But there's, I think, wherever you go, like within the United States, if you focus on any specific region, there's certain things it's known for, right? And if you go
Yes.
to talk about, as we just mentioned, Colorado, Wyoming, it's the mountains, it's the outdoor activities, it's the skiing. And then places like Minnesota, you think, Minnesota, what's so great about Minnesota?
Hmm.
Well, you've got that's kind of the beginning of the Mississippi River, and and also it's the land of what they call 10,000 lakes.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's I haven't heard that in a while. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's also a main attraction. A lot of people go there for the outdoor activities and fishing and things like that.
I will say that Minneapolis reminded me of a mini Chicago.
Oh,
And
really?
it stands to reason. I mean, they're not far from each other, and it's the Midwest.
Yeah, yeah. And it's still one of those places that still gets some pretty harsh winters. I don't know if you want to be there in the middle of winter, though.
No. I'm no way. But yeah, Minneapolis is fine in the summer. And actually, there's a suburb of Minneapolis that I really like, and I think it's called Edina, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's beautiful. I love it.
Oh,
Yeah,
hey,
very nice.
you. So yeah, we associate these geographic features. We also associate certain industries with
Hmm.
different parts of the country. I think certain parts of the world, parts of the United States, their industry is tourism,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so that's where I think when you start thinking about places like Hawaii or Florida, think Disney World, um, and all that that it has to offer, but also all the beaches, all
Hmm.
the cruise industry. Do you like cruising? Going on a cruise?
I've never gone on a cruise. I want to try going on a cruise, um, like with COVID, you start to think, oh, is it a good idea? They don't seem very, they seem like real dirty places, and if anything happens, you're out of luck.
I don't know. There are people I know who love cruises, some who hate them, and of course you can do that even throughout Europe. That you bounce around the Mediterranean,
Hmm.
uh, and I know people who've done that, flown out of here to go to cruise in the Mediterranean. But there are
Yes.
cruises, even just going from point to point within the United States, like bouncing around from New York down to Florida, and then down to uh, the Caribbean, like places like Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States. A lot
Hmm.
of people
Hmm.
forget. Have you been to Puerto Rico ever?
No, no, I would love to visit Puerto Rico.
Yeah. So, and there are some Americans who don't know that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Uh,
Really? Okay.
but yeah, because they'll say, oh, that's they have their own flag, whatever. It's not a state, so it's what we call a territory. And a lot of people don't make that distinction. Like Guam, Guam is part of the United States, but
Hmm.
it's not a state. Uh, and there are places like that that people also travel to. The U.S. Virgin Islands, that's
Hmm.
part of the United States. Uh, it was when the United States was maybe growing as an empire and this having these areas that it was uh, either taking over or governing, that we still hold. So, but yeah, it's a big country, and that's one of the things you have to say about the United States. No matter what, you go from Maine to Florida to California. Have you been anywhere in the areas of the South? Um, like
Yeah, like where?
New Orleans, Atlanta.
Yeah, I've been to both. I Atlanta is an important American city. It's a big city, and well, it's also got the biggest or busiest airport in the country as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like Atlanta. I mean, I like Buckhead, but you know, who doesn't? Um,
Well, you
uh,
got to explain that. I don't know about Buckhead. What do you
oh,
mean,
but well, Buckhead is just north of the center of Atlanta, and it's a posh, beautiful part of Atlanta,
Ah,
basically.
okay.
Yeah, it's nice. Um, and it's known for its just beautiful homes, beautiful estates, very there's space, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and it's very elegant. It's very nice. Also, New Orleans, I found it a bit sloppy. I mean, it's fun to visit, but it's not my thing. I'm not a riverboat gambler. I'm not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those southern cities are not really my thing, like New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf or whatever that Gulf area down there. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've been, and I do recommend you visit. But just realize that yeah, it can be a bit sloppy. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. One
Uh,
one of the great things about travel is that the experience is very subjective, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. That's true. True.
and so my experience in New Orleans was that it was one of the most overhyped places I've ever been to.
Mm, I would
Because
tend to agree.
like it's all about you got to go to the French Quarter. You got to go to the French Quarter.
Yeah,
It's like saying, oh, you got to go to New York City and just see uh,
Times Square.
Times Square or whatever,
Yeah.
the Statue of Liberty. And
Hmm.
and frankly, you know, I don't have an issue with that. With just
Yeah.
saying, okay, that you go there and check that box and say, I've been there.
Yeah.
Get a photo op, take a picture. But the French Quarter to me was like, there's just a bunch of bars here, you know?
Hmm.
And I was
Yeah.
thinking, that's not impressive to me. And it was kind of dirty, but this was maybe a while ago. Maybe they cleaned it up. But the other thing is that it's really about unless you're living there and growing up around that area, many people just associate it with Mardi Gras once a year. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's the big draw, is to enjoy it during Mardi Gras when people just go berserk. Uh,
Yes.
you know, I thought it was overhyped personally, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's a bit of this wonder come horror thing. It's interesting for a minute, and then you're like, oh my god.
And
Oh.
I want to be fair. I think every place has its beauty. You
Hmm.
know, there maybe I didn't see those areas where you have the antebellum housing or
Mhm.
houses that were really old, and they've been maintained very well, and people live there, and there's a certain culture. I think you need to spend time at a place to really understand the culture.
Mhm.
It's not just about seeing the things that are there. So it's not that I'm so superficial. It's just that,
Ever the diplomat, Arthur.
yeah. But anyway, yeah. So, but there's good qualities about it, I'm sure. But I did not enjoy it.
Okay.
It wasn't one of my favorite places. Put
It
it that
okay.
way.
It's okay.
All right.
Now I feel I'm also conflicted about like South Beach or Miami, right? Because
Yeah.
yes, some of it can be very nice, but then at the same time, it can also be very sloppy and very déclassé at the same time. And I've never, Miami is so strange because in that whole general area, you mean the proximity to wealth, okay, it's undeniable, but yet at the same time there is so much sloppiness. I don't understand how those that they can coexist like that, and which just makes New England just 100 times more civilized.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's so. I mean, I'm not just being diplomatic. I know what you're saying there, and it's to a certain extent I have that tendency. I accept that, but it's the amazing diversity that exists within the country that is just so amazing. So, like when you go to places like Miami, yeah, there's this idea that there's in certain parts of the city, Miami Beach, there's money, there's big mansions along the water, there's that, and there's also the Cuban American community. There's also this richness of this immigrant community that has been now a very much part of the character of the city. And there's the politics that are even driven by the Cuban American community. So you have that, and then you have the beauty of the beaches and the weather, notwithstanding the occasional hurricane. You know, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's the you when you think about a place, you think about all those different things: the culture, the land, the people, the weather, the food. We haven't even talked about the food. It's like,
Oh my, that's a episode unto itself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think you sort of have to try to take in a little bit of each of those senses. One thing I liked about what you said earlier was when you're talking about the drives
Mm,
in the Northeast,
mm.
was the smells, the different smells.
Yeah,
It's a total sensory experience where
that's right.
you take in different smells, different sights, different sounds, um, and different flavors. And so all of that, and even a different feel, if you will, about how the vibe is. And
Hmm.
that's more of like a mental feel, but then you have texture feel, like it just feels
Mm-hmm.
different, you
Yeah.
know. So I think, yeah, it's all about experiences and what you can make the most of it, and also where your mind is, where your head is.
Hmm.
What is your headspace when you're going into a place? Uh, what do you think about that? I mean, this idea of the whole, you bring into it a certain your own biases going into a certain
Oh,
place.
for sure. Yeah.
So how do you try to stay objective with that, whether you're in Europe or anywhere else in the U.S.?
Oh, I don't think it's possible. For me, it's very difficult to stay objective because at the end of the day, our experience is always going to be uniquely ours. So why do we want to be objective when at the end of the day, it's still going to be our own experience and the biases inherently built in. But I will say that a lot of the biases are formed by the media that we consume. We maybe have this fantasy idea of certain places based on movies or whatever. And like, for example, you're reading Stephen King and a lot of his novels, the place is a character in the story, the way he describes these, New England towns and everything. And I read John Steinbeck when he wrote that piece about Positano, and I had a certain idea of this is, by the way, Positano is a city, a little town in Italy, and I had a certain idea of what the town was like, and it's not like that because it's like now over tourism. Nonetheless, you'll accept what the bad that comes with the place because you are so captivated, or you have so romanticized it, and I think that's fine, and I think that it's inevitable.
Yeah, yeah. And the place from where you come, Hollywood, I think either has done a beautiful job in certain uh, depictions of that, meaning the place as an
Hmm.
important element of the experience, the character of the place.
Hmm.
And sometimes they've done a terrible job of it by making Lake Placid being a place of horror.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
it's like, but yeah, I think the place is wherever we are, it does really impact us in how we think, how we see the world, how we see the rest of the world, how we see other places. I don't know how much time we got left, but yeah, just kind of remind me as we're getting closer. But yeah, there's so much we could touch on here as we talk about not just the experience of a place that we enjoy, but also how we think about it, and even how we choose certain places to go. I mean, what was your criteria personally when you thought about as a discretionary choice? I want to go here. What made
Hmm.
you think that?
Are we talking about like in the U.S.?
Yeah, yeah. Like, like the curiosity, was it, I never been there before? Was it like I knew somebody there and I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
learn more about it?
Well, because well, one, I'm always very interested in different parts of the country because it's such a big country, and I realize how different Americans can be from one corner to the next. And also, I think, and this is more personal for me, which is that a lot of people have told me that I live in a bubble, and so I was always the one. I was always the kind of person that's like, okay, I don't want to be that person that lives in the bubble but doesn't know what things are like outside the bubble. That doesn't mean I don't want to stay in my bubble. It just means that I want to have awareness. And so I want to see the world. I want to see places in the US. That doesn't mean
Yeah,
I don't want to come back to my bubble, but it just means that I want to see what's out there. I want to know what the options are. Whereas there's some people who only want to stay in their bubble. They got blinders on. They don't even want to know what's out there. I'm the opposite. I know where I want to be. I just want to know what else is around me.
yeah. And I think in the world that we live today, the kind of philosophy that you're just kind of expressing makes a lot of sense to me. We live in such a multicultural, multilingual, uh, multi everything world that in order for us to live and still be sane and understand things, we do need to see a place other than the one that we either grew up in or were familiar with. Go to unfamiliar places. That's a good thing, and that makes you, I think, a more broad-minded, um, more intelligent person. And so maybe I'm again being somewhat harsh in judging others, but I think there are people who choose to not see things, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think this is kind of one of the things you're touching on. And so whether you choose to go, within your country, in many cities, within many different venues or places and experience within your own country, or will you go elsewhere, I think it reflects this positive idea that we need to be exposed to many different things. Um, yeah, that's a good thing. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. That's right. As the world becomes more and more globalized, this whole idea of a global village, and even you guys who are trying to learn English, we're all becoming more connected in so many ways. So it never hurts to explore things outside of your immediate knowledge area.
yeah, and one thing I'll also say, and maybe wrapping this up soon, but in talking about the diversity of the U.S. and the places that exist here, is that many of these places in the U.S. do have a kind of um, uh, demographic composition, right? That's kind of a
Hmm.
fancy set of words to say that there's generally a group of people that come from certain places in
Yeah.
that part of the country. So, like in Southern California, it's many major areas of the country, many major cities, urban areas. It's very multicultural, but
Hmm.
you can say that there's more Asian Americans on the West Coast than there are in the South,
Hmm.
and you can say there's a greater prevalence of uh, South Asians, right?
Yeah.
Indian Americans, Pakistani Americans in Houston than there are in, uh, let's say, I'll pick a city, Denver, right?
Yeah.
There's something about Houston that has gravitated a lot of people from South Asia, and part of it is from NASA and the science, and also the ports that have drawn in a lot of people who are working the merchant mariner community, and I know that. So, like, uh, as you think about that diversity, you can see a good part of the world right here in the U.S. Right
Yeah.
there. We were talking about Minneapolis earlier. Did you
Hmm.
know that it is the uh, well, it is a very strong. It has a strong representation of people from Somalia
I
and
didn't know that. Oh.
also Laos.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's true. Um, and I didn't know that until I looked into things like that. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. But yeah, you have also Japanese Americans and as like back people from your ethnic background. You know, I also obviously you've grown up in the U.S. I think you were born in the U.S., right?
Right.
Yeah, but there's a very large Asian American representation from Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, um, people from Vietnam, right? Vietnamese
Hmm.
Americans, and
Yes.
so there's a lot of fishing and shrimpers in the Gulf Coast that are Vietnamese. Okay,
Oh, interesting. Huh.
huge representation of people who left fishing from Vietnam and became fishermen in in the Gulf Coast. I'm talking about 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Hmm.
And their next generation of folks, people who have grown up in the United States, are Vietnamese Texans, right?
Yeah, that's so funny you say the Vietnamese Texan thing because I recently came across a YouTuber who was Vietnamese American and
Yeah,
Texan, and he
yep,
was speaking with a Texan accent. I'm like, what? It was a little bit of
yeah.
that like record scratching sound, like, huh? Come again?
It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, didn't expect that.
Yeah, I heard of a couple of Pakistani Americans who have a like a southern drawl. I was like, whoa, what is going on? And they would use different words.
Yes.
Like like my my wife's nieces in Michigan, um, they'll always say pop instead of soda,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yes,
the
yes.
way they talk there. And even though they grew up around a Muslim community and amongst a fairly diverse community, and I mean a Muslim household and Pakistani household, they grew up in Michigan outside Detroit, where there's a very large Arab American population, very
Hmm.
large.
I didn't know that either. Okay.
The largest Arab population outside of the Middle East is in Dearborn, Michigan.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So you can see a lot of the world just traveling around the U.S.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
you want to
Yes.
go to some
Sure.
really good Arab restaurants, go to Michigan. You want to go to some
Hmm.
really good Cuban restaurants, go to Miami.
Yeah.
You'll amazing Pakistani restaurants in Toronto, which is in
Hmm.
Canada, but also in Houston, Texas.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
uh, Great Italian in New York, great Japanese in California. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. Not to
Um,
mention, places like, and I don't want to get stereotypical, but yeah, you've heard of Chinatown in San Francisco,
mhm.
but there's a Chinatown in a lot of cities. Okay,
Yes, there are.
and yeah, so yeah, I've been to a lot of those Chinatowns as well, and there's parts of it. Oh, another one I'll mention is Chicago. Huge Pakistani population there. In fact, they renamed. one of the city's major streets to Jinnah Avenue,
Oh,
named after the
okay.
Pakistani founder of the country. Yeah,
It's fascinating. Yeah, just the diversity in America is fascinating. Yeah, I think that that's definitely something that's a surprise to many people.
it
But
is. It is. Lots to see, and
yeah,
lots of diversity of people to experience it with.
definitely a reason to visit. But well, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Thank you so much for listening and all the way to the end. Arthur, I
Yeah, it's
really
been
enjoyed
great.
it.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having these talks, kind of exploring the language and also exploring a little bit of culture as
Sure.
we kind of learn about places and people and even some of the phrasing that we use as we talk about these things. It's great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate
Yep.
it, Ben.
Yeah, same here. All right. Thanks, Arthur. Thank you, everybody. And we look forward to our next podcast. So stick around for that. See you guys in the next podcast.
Yeah,
So,
take care. Bye
mhm.
bye.
Bye. Bye for now.